everybody. Thank you for joining us. Just give you 30 seconds to get settled in, make sure we've got everybody there. Just to make sure you're at the right session. This is from the University of Manchester, discussing the impact report on their school governor initiative, which I'm definitely excited to hear about, having placed lots of governors from the university. Brilliant. I think we will get started proper. If I could have the next slide, please, Ollie. So just say hi and welcome. Many thanks for joining us this afternoon and over your lunch. I'm just going to run through some brief housekeeping with you. So closed captions are available. If you like them, you can just select them on your end. Our speakers have been invited to share a short description of ourselves just to support anybody with visual impairment and to make sure that the session is inclusive. Based on that, chat function has been disabled because it can be quite difficult with audio readers to be able to make sense of what's going on there. So if you've got any questions, please do enter them in the Q&A panel. I'm going to save most questions for the end, but if it's something I can help with, I'll answer as we go in. Just to let you know, this session is being recorded and links to the video will be sent out afterwards. And we'll also send links to slides and some resources and our contact details too. If you're on social media, do please share your thoughts with the hashtag GfS Conference 21, and we'd be really pleased to see that afterwards. And once this session's finished, we will send you the link to a really short survey, but we would really appreciate your feedback. So just to introduce myself, my name is Emma Harris. I'm Senior Partnerships Manager with Governors for Schools, and I'm a school governor as well. I'm female, white, early 40s, and I've got blonde hair tied back currently. I'm joined by Alison Gregory. Alison is Widening Participation Officer at the University of Manchester and has led the School Governor Initiative at the university since its inception 10 years ago now. She's worked in a number of higher education institutions throughout her career and is also a school governor at a secondary academy in Rochdale. And I'm also joined by Jessica Lister. Jess is Policy Manager at Public First's Education Practice, where she focuses primarily on higher education projects. Before joining Public First, she also worked in a widening participation team at the University of Cambridge. And I'm now going to hand over to Alison.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'm a white female in my 40s. I've got dark blonde hair just above the shoulder. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining our sessions today. Really pleased to be able to have this time with you to tell you more about the impact study that we've been looking into over recent months. So I'll go for the first slide, please. Okay, so before I tell you about our findings from the impact study, I just want to give you a little history of the last 10 years very briefly. So we've been partnering with Governors for Schools all of that time. We began in the academic year 2011 at the end of that year going into 2012, and we first targeted our staff at the University of Manchester to get on board with our new initiative regarding school governance. And it was a couple of years later that we then looked at the potential that our alumni community has to basically join forces with staff and make an even bigger impact on governor vacancies. And this whole initiative was really wrapped around our social responsibility agenda, which is one of the core goals at the University of Manchester. And this particular initiative was about making a difference to schools and our local communities. What we did at the same time as starting our Governor Initiative, in order to support that initiative, we set up a staff network to bring all governors within the university together and to support them through a range of events that we could put on for our staff alongside their own responsibilities with the school in which they were governing. The next slide. So where we are now, 10 years later, is that we've placed over 1,300 governors. Our current staff network comprises 220 governors, and our 220 ULM governors are in a range of educational settings, from nursery and primaries, secondaries, special schools, multi-academy trusts, secondary schools and sixth forms. Our alumni network continues to grow at pace. Just this last year, we placed 85 new governors through Governors for Schools, and so far this year, 76. It's all great news, but we do recognise that there are still a lot of vacancies nationally. Many of these are advertised with Governors for Schools. We know they've got lots of vacancies on their books at the current moment, and we know that many more exist across the regions and across the country. So what we really wanted to do is we wanted to see what our impact has been, and then look forward to see what the impact of the HE sector as a whole could be. And we want to try and plug these gaps where these national vacancies. And the way we've done that is that we've looked at what the HE sector can do by creating a model, a type of calculator. And Jess, my colleague here, she'll be explaining what we've done about that later in the presentation. Okay, next slide. Okay, so our current staff governors, 220. We estimate this to be over 18,000 hours of volunteering, impacting around 98,000 children in schools, and with an equivalent estimated financial value of around 340,000. So that is just really one of the kind of key things about governing. You know, the impact it can have when you have numbers of this kind of scale is quite impactful. And obviously our alumni governors sit on top of that figure as well. But that's really just to give you an indication of the impact we're having currently with our 220 members of staff. Okay, next slide, please. So just to summarise, the reason we've done this report, it's kind of been explained, but we just really want to take stock after 10 years to see where we are. By seeing where we are now and seeing what impact we've made so far, we can start to look forward and see what impact we're going to try and make going forward. We know that these achievements that we've made at Manchester, they can be repeated by other universities, they can even be improved upon. And in essence, you know, our achievements can be multiplied over and over again by the HE sector. And that's really what the crux of the report is about. It's about encouraging other universities, perhaps those who are still undecided whether to take on this initiative, or those that have already started and not quite sure how big to go with it. We know that we just want to kind of encourage people and say, this is what we've done, and we know you can do the same. And that's where our model comes in, and that's where later on in the presentation, that's where you'll hear more from Jess. Okay, next slide, please. So the report is only launching today, so it's gone live on our website today. A link will be coming around to the report after today's event, and it's focusing mainly on 5 areas. It's focusing on the growth, the locality, the skills and the professional background of our governors, what its impact on diversity has been, and the overall impact we've had on schools. So next slide, please. Okay, 2 graphs here just to show you. Back in 2011 with our staff, we started with a baseline of 52 members of staff being a governor. And similarly in 2013-14, we started with 125 alumni. For the first few years of our initiative, we saw massive hikes, both in staff and alumni relishing the opportunity to give back to the community, to make a difference to pupils' education, but also to develop their own skills, get involved with their children's school as well, and try maybe volunteering for the first time. And it was the network, having that inbuilt network at the university, that really gave our staff the confidence to try being a governor, knowing that there was a support mechanism in place. And you know, you can see there that that's just a continuous growth over the last 10 years. Okay, next slide. Recently, to do the report, we did some surveys and we looked at data. Now 58% have governed for more than 4 years. So out of the 220, 58% have been governing for more than 4 years, and a governing term is 4 years. So many are in their second and possibly their third term of governing. 77% of staff and 83% of our alumni have also taken on additional responsibilities since becoming a governor. So many of them, over half of them, are actually now chair or vice chair of their governing body. There are lots of other positions of responsibility that they may have taken on as well. And what's really pleasing is that 88% of staff and 91% of alumni feel that they do make a difference to the school and to the children in that school. Next slide. So in terms of locality, well, our biggest impact has been in the Northwest. 94% of our staff govern in the Northwest and 38% of alumni govern there as well. London and the South East are the two next largest areas where our alumni governors are. There's 12% of our governors are in London and 15% of our alumni governors are in the South East. And what was really important for us was that we also made sure we were governing in the right area, in areas of disadvantage where it's more difficult to recruit governors to local school governing bodies. So in the report, you will see where we're making the biggest difference. There are maps contained in the report where you will see that we are placing governors in the right areas. Okay, next slide. So a really important part of governing is around the skills that governors contribute and the professional background of the governors. Now, looking at data which we got from Governors for Schools, the biggest skills are requested in the areas of finance, education, HR and legal skills. When we looked at data on our alumni governors, we saw that the largest majorities were working in the field of education, finance and the medical healthcare sectors. So already there's a synergy between skills being requested and the professional background of our alumni. When we looked at the data on our staff, we also saw that the largest skill sets being offered were in finance, education, tech and ICT skills, but also in HR and marketing. And the demand for skills, and the skills of our alumni, they were offering skills in education, finance, tech skills and ICT skills, marketing, health and safety, and HR. So again, you can see that alumni and staff in higher education are really hitting the mark in terms of the skills that they are able to offer. Now, our staff and alumni also had skills in marketing and mental health, which were also asked for by schools. But the two areas where perhaps we don't meet the demand are in SEND and safeguarding. So they're two areas perhaps where the HE sector perhaps can't quite fill that gap, but it's a really small number of skills that perhaps the HE sector isn't just equipped to offer. Next slide, please. We also wanted to look at how we are tackling the issue of diversity through our governor initiative, because adding new governors to the board who are reflective of the community that the school serves can really help it make better decisions in the interest of all pupils. Nationally, the ethnic diversity of school governors is low at only 6% from a non-white background and only 3% in the Northwest. However, our staff data shows that 12.5% of our staff governors are from a non-white background. Similarly, in terms of age range, several years ago, the National Governors Association ran a campaign to get more governors under 40. Now, nationally, only 11% of governors are under 40, whereas our staff governors make up 22% of in the under 40 age range, and our alumni governors are actually 31% under 40. So we are having a real impact there on both the age range and the ethnic background of our governors. Okay, next slide, please. And finally, just to finish, I wanted to just talk about an overall impact that we're having on school governor vacancies and the impact that we're having on schools. As I've said, university staff and alumni have a real broad range of skills and knowledge to contribute. But at the same time, they've got that perspective of education, either from studying at higher education level or working in higher education. So to have staff and alumni on a governing board can bring a really different perspective of education. And with the alumni, they're not just coming from an educational background, they're coming from a real range of industries and professions. So it's a very broad, diverse set of skills that they can bring to a governing board. And what's really pleasing to hear is the unexpected benefits that schools receive from linking with higher education. Now, in particular, staff governors can bring knowledge about university events and activities that can really increase a school's engagement with higher education. They can bring information about outreach opportunities, which is particularly valuable for schools in widening participation schools. They can bring access to student volunteers, which may in turn bring extra support to schools, particularly other opportunities for volunteering, for example, in primary schools for undergraduate students. And that kind of expertise they have in the HR and the legal side of things can bring support to schools in other ways too, not just on the board. And if you read some of the case studies in the report that I've written, you'll see many examples of where our governors have brought additional benefits in terms of their professional background. And as I've mentioned, they help increase diversity on the board as well. So I'm going to leave it there. They're the main findings from the report. I will come back to you with some conclusions at the end, but for now I'm going to pass over to Jess.
Brilliant, thank you, Alison. So my name is Jess Lister. I'm a higher education policy manager at Public First. I'm 25, I've got short brown hair, and Public First is a research and public policy consultancy. We work with a lot of clients across education, including 20 universities. And as Emma said at the start, I've also previously worked in widening participation and done a lot of work between universities and schools. So this project in particular was really close to my heart because I've seen firsthand the kind of potential impact of universities working in partnerships, with schools, both at a local level and at a national level. If I could just have the next slide. Brilliant. So we were asked by the University of Manchester to answer sort of an exam question related to their impact report, which was what would happen if more universities ran a school governors initiative? As you just heard from Alison, the University of Manchester has really successfully encouraged its alumni and its staff across the country to become school governors. And these two things are actually, two of the only really consistent features of England's very diverse higher education sector. They all have staff and they all have alumni, in different numbers, in different shapes and sizes, in different proportions, but it's kind of there across the sector. So we use data from HESA, the Higher Education Statistics Agency, I think, to look at historic data on the number of staff and the number of students who come in and out of each of the UK universities. We did this for 121 different universities. And we calculated a conversion rate, which was based on the number of governors placed by the University of Manchester over the period which they've been using the school's governors initiative. And we applied this to other universities across the country. With all sorts of kind of data and modelling, there's always a long list of caveats. The data is never as perfect as we would like it to be. So we can't accurately, for example, model graduate and alumni mobility. You know, graduates will move all around the country. Some may leave the UK, some may leave and come back. We can't accurately kind of address that. We can't model kind of exactly how many alumni are still in touch with their university. We can make some estimates and some guesses. And we don't know exactly, for example, how many alumni might pick up the phone if someone from their university rang them to tell them they should become a school governor. When we took all of this into account, using the kind of conversion rates based from the University of Manchester, we would estimate quite comfortably, I think, that around 2,400 new school governors a year could be placed from staff and alumni networks across the country. So that would be 12,000 over 5 years. And that's around 50% of the current 4,300 vacancies advertised with governors for schools. It's a number that takes into account the flow of people into universities. So each year, new students join, new staff may join, staff may leave. Often they may leave to join other institutions. And that means that almost uniquely for universities, they have a new pool of people entering the institution each year that they kind of add to their growing governor recruitment lists. If I had the next slide, please. So universities are almost unique institutions to address kind of national level school governor shortages. Alison has just touched on this in her presentation, but you know, we felt that in particular, university staff have a range of skills and expertise that could be helpful to their local schools. This isn't just talking about academic staff in universities, but things like facilities management, in HR, in finance and in payroll. And as Alison just said, in some demand areas, including marketing, mental health, universities have all of these teams within them. And university staff tend to have stronger links in their communities than alumni who can be more transient. Now, that's not the case for all universities. Some universities are very different and they are very local. But if you take an institution like Manchester, its alumni will travel from all around the country to go to Manchester. And when they return, they'll go to lots of different places. Primarily, they'll go to London. The Centre for Cities estimates that a quarter of new graduates from UK university work in London 6 months after graduation. However, as the table on the slide will show, encouraging more university staff to become school governors does show a really significant impact across all regions. We reckon that around 942 new school governors a year could be placed from university staff alone if the schemes were as successful as the University of Manchester, and that assumes that the staff population changes on about the same rate. So while this is kind of 221 new governors in areas like London, which has a lot of higher education institutions, there's still kind of significant regional impacts across the rest of the country. Even more so if you kind of multiply this over 5 years and then over 10 years. And part of the reason we ran this work with the University of Manchester was to kind of look at the impact of universities in some of these cold spot regions. So they tend to be more rural areas away from big cities where schools may struggle more with their school governor recruitment. But obviously universities themselves, widening participation teams, they will have a good understanding of their local area and be able to kind of target that resource, working with their school partners where it fits best. Thinking about the University of Cambridge, for example, where I used to work, we did a lot of work not just in Cambridge, which is kind of a more metropolitan graduate heavy area, where lots of people who were quite keen to get involved in things like school governors. We did a lot of work out in Peterborough, out in Norfolk, and kind of targeting staff towards those schools as well. If I could have the next slide, please. One of snags we hit when we were making this model with Alison and with the University of Manchester team, as I said, was that the data wasn't perfect. So we could only kind of have exactly the numbers, student numbers by institution for the last 7 years. We're not saying that universities could or would only recruit from these groups, but that gave us a kind of initial number and an indication for how many alumni a university would have. However, we assume that universities will have a larger network than what we've initially modelled. And the reason I'm highlighting this isn't to kind of suggest that there are flaws in our model, but to say that actually we think the impact of universities could be much greater than the 2,400 number we started with. We estimate that if universities are able to maximise the number of alumni they can contact and support to become school governors, they could fill potentially as many as 8,000 vacancies each year. That number might fluctuate, it may drop off. You know, if every university started a scheme tomorrow, you might see, as Alison did, kind of initial rush and then a bit of a plateau. But we think the kind of maximum impact would be this 8,000 number each year. And that's really significant for the school sector and for the kind of school governance sector, kind of mobilising a pool of people with a range of skills from a range of backgrounds, from really diverse kind of locations, regions, backgrounds to become school governors. And I guess the final point to raise is that university alumni's teams and university teams themselves will have the best data on all of this. They will know where graduates are, they'll be able to target them to particular areas of need. And to help to go alongside the report, we've created with the University of Manchester a calculator that if you are here from a university, you should be able to go onto the website, which will circulate at the end of this presentation, and have a look for yourselves about the kind of targets that we think, based on the data from the University of Manchester, your institution might be able to achieve. What we reckon is that some institutions, they'll already be a step ahead of where Manchester was. They might already have some work with maybe with governors for schools, maybe with similar institutions. They may be really well set up to work with their partner schools and have a really good understanding. So we've also set each institution a kind of stretch and challenge target. So there's one target on the website for if your institution is as good as Manchester. There's a challenge target for if we think we could be more successful than this. And there's also a target for kind of maybe smaller institutions that are thinking about running this for the first time. And our hope is that you are able to kind of take this and take some of the calculators and the tools and the data modelling that we've done and take that back to your institution, you know, to your senior leaders, and kind of show them what we think the potential impact your university could have. Hopefully we've set the rationale for why that's a good project, why that would be a good thing to run. And hopefully this report and our model will give you some of the tools to start having those conversations in your institutions. I pass back to Alison now, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Is there a next slide?
I'm not sure if it's the next slide. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so really just to sum up, I mean, there is a long way to go to fill the government vacancies nationally, but we've made, at Manchester, we've made really good inroads, both in the Northwest and in London. But we as a sector can do more to help other regions in England and Wales. Our staff and alumni in higher education have most of the skills that's needed to help our schools become more successful, and I think we can make a real difference to schools in disadvantaged areas. There are several recommendations contained within the report, but my personal recommendation for all universities thinking about starting an initiative would be to create a network for staff, just to give staff that support, reassurance, and give them that peer support as well from their colleagues, because having run the initiative for 10 years, I know how much staff at the university value being able to speak to a colleague about their role as a governor. And if there's anybody thinking about becoming a governor or is unsure, then part of my role was to put them in touch with a current governor, so they could really talk it through. So my personal recommendation would be to have a governance network running alongside your initiative. So thank you, and we are open for questions.
Lovely, thanks so much, Alison and Jess. We are open for questions, absolutely. I've got one already for you. I think it's aimed at both of you, so I'll let you choose who goes first. Have you considered staff and alumni from FECs with HE provision in the model? Possibly more at Jess, that question, I think. So further education colleges.
That is for me, brilliant. Yeah, so when we ran this initially, we have modelled it for 121 higher education, so just universities rather than further education colleges that do HE provision. The only reason for this is that we wanted to kind of this kind of model doesn't, no one's kind of tried to do this before on a national scale for all institutions, and we were conscious about recommending kind of too high, if that makes sense. So we kind of started just with universities, but I'd be really interested in looking at the potential implications of adding further education colleges into that as well, because there is the same kind of resourcing, the same, they have staff, they have alumni, people coming in through. So they're not included in this model, but only because this was kind of meant to start the conversation, I guess. And it'd be really interesting to take it forward and look at that as well.
Thanks, Jess. I know at Governance for Schools we do work with a couple of kind of colleges and college networks, but we would definitely be open to that, because like Jess has said, you've got the same kind of setup, you've got the staff and alumni, and also perhaps in slightly different areas as well, where it might be a lot more difficult to recruit governors. So yeah, please do get in touch if you'd be interested in discussing that. Something that I wanted to ask you, Alison, is you talked about your governor network. What's been your top tip for keeping that network engaged and talking to each other? What kind of things are in place to support them?
Okay, yeah, so we have some set again, kind of set items throughout the year. So we do an annual conference, and we have 3 meetings per year where governors can come along voluntarily. We kind of get a speaker to come and to talk about an issue at the meeting, but we also let governors, the staff governors, kind of put their own agenda items on. So it's a place for them to come together and meet each other. We kind of constantly send out relevant information to them. So whether that's about events or activities happening at the university aimed at their schools, so they can kind of pass that information on, or if it's specifically around governors themselves, whether it's around some training or resources that are available, then sending that out to the staff network. And people put their own kind of queries and questions out on a kind of a distribution as well. So we find that as well as kind of me putting out communications, the governors themselves use it to communicate with each other. And there's a real kind of core group within that 220 that will always come to the network, will always be at the conference, etc. And other people just use it as and when they perhaps need information. But everybody comments on how useful the information we send out for schools is. They love for their own school to have the benefit of them being a governor there. And I think that if they can bring an opportunity to their school, obviously, they know that's going to be something really favourable for the school.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from our side, we are often asked by schools for people with HE experience, also FE experience as well. So it's really useful to have those kind of strategic links. A question from the floor, which is probably more for you, Alison. Do you have any figures about any of the governors withdrawing over time? Any stats around that?
Yes. So I do have stats around that, and I have kept a spreadsheet of people who have left governor. I'd say over the 10 years, we've probably had in the region of 85 to 100 governors either resign or leave the university or not renew their kind of next term. So they might have done 4 years and decided not to do a second term. They may have left because their circumstances have changed, but if they've left the university, I won't keep a record of them anymore. So they may still be a governor, but they're not a staff member, so they're moved off the central database. So yeah, over 10 years we've probably lost around 80 to 100 governors.
If I just add, when we did the model, that kind of 2,400 a year figure is kind of based on one school governor vacancy at one school being filled. So we didn't look at the potential duration of that, or whether they would renew that for another term. Obviously that is something to consider, but when we, on a pure kind of data basis, we kind of put everyone as one, so kind of plus one, and that was based on the data we got from Manchester about how many over time they'd placed in schools, and what kind of rate, if that makes sense. So it's not kind of a part of the model, that withdrawal. We just kind of looked at each new vacancy being filled and kind of did it in that way. But it's a really good point to raise.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question: have you considered introducing the scheme to undergraduates and postgraduate students, for example, supporting employability skills? Alison, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yes, we've certainly thought about it for postgraduate, and we have had some postgraduates come as part of the network. Not very many, but through, I suppose, through their academic links, the academic has sometimes informed us that one of the postgrad students is a governor and can they be added to the network, which of course they can be, and they were. I think in terms of undergraduates, we did consider this right at the beginning. Our rationale really was because it was a 4-year term and most people are on an undergraduate course for 3 years. That was one of the reasons we decided against promoting it to the undergraduate population. But I think it was at that same time as when we looked at alumni and thought, well, actually, we've got an even bigger community outside of the university that have been through the higher education process, and a lot are still in the Northwest. So that was really the decision we took at the time. But I do get asked about undergraduates, but I think unless we saw a huge demand for that, we probably wouldn't take that route.
Yeah, and just to kind of build on that, I guess we've always gone exactly down the same route, that it's a 4-year term of office, and actually students can be quite transient when they're undergraduate. But there's maybe in the next few years going to be a slight change in that remote governance is now so much more popular. So actually, if an undergraduate student then moves out of the area, potentially there's a bit more opportunity for them to stay in role. So we'll certainly see how remote governance goes and see if that becomes an opportunity. Also, just to say, obviously postgraduate are reaching alumni. This autumn we will be organising an event specifically for MBA students, and that will be across all universities, so we'll be sending more details out about that after the conference. But then we'll also be starting to look at things like PGCE students as well. So yeah, there's lots of different roads that we can take. It's an exciting time, I think. Have you had any successes in drawing people into chairing or vice chairing roles?
Yes, many of the current network are chairs and vice chairs. Some people became chairs and vice chairs very quickly after joining the governing board. I mean, sometimes people do join a governing board perhaps when it's going through a change, a restructure, or a kind of a change of personnel, and sometimes new people do just flourish in that role and kind of quickly get voted. People suggest that they should be vice chair, and then maybe within another year they're chair. But yeah, a lot do, and I think over half of the network are currently chair or vice chair.
It's pretty significant numbers, isn't it? Yeah, and I guess part of that is about having the support from the university and knowing that they'll have some flexibility to be able to commit to that increased level of responsibility. Yeah. Another question for you: how has the pandemic even impacted your governor recruitment? Have you seen any decline in numbers or take up of the role?
Yeah. Not so much with alumni. We're still on target. I think it was about 76 so far become governors, 85 last year, but obviously that was during the pandemic. and that probably is a bit lower than in previous years for alumni, I would say, but I'd need to check. I think it's more usually around perhaps 125, something like that, for alumni in a year. I think the staff recruitment has been a lot lower. I think you'd agree, Emma, that we've not had as many applications from staff to start governing. Obviously, like any industry, obviously, you know, a lot going on for university staff, kind of being having to adapt quickly to new ways of working, etc. So I can understand why perhaps people haven't felt this year as being a particularly good time to start something new until things have kind of settled down back at the university. But I do think on the plus side that with the virtual kind of, you know, not necessarily going into school to govern, I think that might encourage more people long term if that continues. I think just at this current time, governing boards are deciding whether to continue with online or go back to face-to-face governing, and my governing board has just confirmed today that we will be having a face-to-face meeting shortly for the first time.
Good. Yeah, no, definitely boards are in that process of deciding. If anyone's interested in remote governance, we do have a presentation about that on Friday as part of the conference session. So please do have a look into that. And I have another question for you. Do you have an academic lead linked to the project? And does that help to raise the profile of the initiative in Manchester?
Yes, we do. We have an academic who was a governor in the network, who was very keen to be involved, was actually doing some research into governance. The lady is in the business school at Manchester, and a few years into the initiative, we kind of had a conversation about her becoming the academic lead on that. And that has proved to be extremely valuable, particularly in terms of the conference, the annual conference every year. She's got some amazing links with a range of organisations, and a range of organisations that she works with in her own role, not only as a governor, but kind of in other extensions of her role as a governor as well. So she does a lot of conferences herself, she speaks at conferences herself, so she's very well networked, and that's obviously helped me a great deal with that. But definitely on the academic side, we're actually, our split I think is about 45% academics and 55% professional services staff at Manchester, so kind of quite close really in terms of the split between academic and professional staff.
Thanks, Alison. Jess, question for you. Was there anything that you found surprising in the data?
Yeah, I think the potential scale of the impact surprised us so much that we had to find ways of making the kind of overall number a bit lower. It didn't seem right at first, you know. I think what we maybe underestimated was just how many universities, and especially now if we look to add further education colleges to that, you know, it almost sort of, you know, solved your school governor recruitment crisis, which didn't quite seem right. So, you know, we had to add quite a lot of caveats about, you know, well, potentially universities might only be able to contact, say, 50% of their alumni, so we'll half that number, and this number may leave, so we'll half that number in there. And kind of by the time we got to the 2,400 a year estimate, it still felt quite high to us from when we anticipated going into it, and for us to be able to quite confidently say that that's probably a minimum number if every university ran a scheme at the scale of Manchester. And obviously that might not be possible for lots of reasons, but you know, we when it kind of spit those first estimates out, when we produced this model, we almost had to go back in and revise downwards rather than revise upwards, which in my experience of modelling, it normally goes much the other way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Jess.
I mean, I think what you'll find any university beginning an initiative, if you market and promote it the right way, and if you get the partnership in place with Governors for Schools, and you get your communications out, you will see you know, a massive kind of uptake in the first few years. So whilst our position at Manchester now with our staff is, you know, I think we're on 70. No, we're probably only around an average of about 20 a year in a normal year now, but obviously that wasn't the case in the early years. We were recruiting 70 or 80 every year. So I think the first few years are when you'll really kind of bring your network together and start to plug those gaps.
And just to clarify, we kind of based our numbers off the 10-year average for Manchester, so hopefully it does take into account a little bit that initial influx and excitement, and then a kind of almost finds a sustainable number each year to kind of bring into the network and into the project. So absolutely. We tried to take that into account as well.
I think in the last year as well, there's been a lot less flux in terms of new staff joining universities. So whereas normally we kind of have a bank of people new to the university that are able to consider taking on that role in loads of industries, that's just kind of been on hold in the last year. So I imagine as things start to get back to a bit more normal, there'll be that kind of new blood to governance coming in, hopefully. I think I'll take this question if that's all right. Someone's asked, can remote governors really be as effective as those governors who visit the school regularly, talk to staff and pupils and absorb the ethos of the establishment? And I think that's a really valid question. You know, remote governance is not going to be for every school, and it's certainly not going to be for every governor. We've got lots, you know, the vast majority of our governors are very keen to be going into school and being part of that school community, really. I think there is a role for remote governance, particularly where schools are looking to perhaps diversify their networks, so make sure that they're able to tap into other networks that perhaps they're not normally able to, where they're having real difficulty in recruiting, and where there's a specific skill set that they're perhaps really finding hard to recruit to. And I think that kind of idea of a hybrid model could work potentially quite well, where you've got people on the board who understand the community, you know, get to go into school all the time. But I think on most boards, you've not got every governor going into school really regularly. So it's going to be different for each board and each governor, but certainly a start of having those conversations, I think, has been brought forward by the being forced into remote governance basically for the last year and a half. One more question I've got here is, have you found that new governors have needed more support during the last academic year? At Cardiff Uni, we found that several new and recently recruited governors have left the role. Any thoughts on that?
I can't say it's been particularly apparent. I kind of led more ad hoc network meetings. So in addition to the 3 network meetings a year, I've also done what I've just called like virtual coffee mornings, where we've just kind of kept it open, not got a formal agenda, just kept it open for staff to join in if they're experiencing kind of any issues or any difficulties or have kind of questions they wanted to ask. And I'd say at the beginning of the pandemic, these were quite we had quite a number of people coming along to those, but I'd say generally they tapered off a little bit. People didn't seem to kind of need that extra support, but as I mentioned earlier, they could still use like email communication to the whole network. So if they have had particular questions, that hadn't disappeared. There's still that kind of opportunity to talk to colleagues through email, etc. And obviously with Governors for Schools, there's a lot of training being available this kind of last 12 to 18 months, different webinars, and we've highlighted that to our staff. So I'm sure many have been utilising that resource as well for extra support. But no, in terms of actually resigning, no, I haven't seen any big increase in resignations or people deciding against governance.
Good to hear, very good to hear. And we did just run a session before this one on effective onboarding of governors, actually, and I think hearing some of the conversations in that, because it's been the first time boards have had to try and induct somebody remotely, I think that has caused quite a few challenges. And it's not to say it can't be done, but it's, you know, in line with lots of other priorities coming at schools and boards in the last year. I don't know as induction has always been as effective as it could have been remotely when someone's not had the opportunity to go to school and see it, and that can, you know, that can affect motivation as well. So yeah, it's good to hear that they've not gone down at University of Manchester though. That's all the questions that I've had for the minute. I just wondered if you could give a couple of top tips, Alison, about launching a network, and like what would be your top tips to make sure that it really does become embedded within the institution?
Yeah. Our strategy was kind of top down, so have your kind of senior leaders talk to their senior leaders about embedding it either in their strategy or kind of as a university-wide initiative. Feed that down to kind of faculty leads and heads of divisions to kind of talk to their staff about it, communicate it, and if you've got like a staff intranet, kind of get some good promotion or artwork or anything you can kind of get out to make it visually appealing. When we first started, we had governors for schools on campus quite a lot. I know that's not possible just probably at the moment, but when things get back to normal, about having a presence, kind of having a banner stand, having an area where staff can just come and talk to you, have governors for schools alongside you, so people can just pass by and ask questions, find out a little bit more before they sign up. I think that's how we got in the early days before it was so well known across the university, just lots of opportunity for people to come along and talk to staff who were going to be involved. And yeah, just keep feeding the message down about the benefits of doing it, because it doesn't just benefit schools, it benefits the individual as well. There's enormous benefits for staff who become governors in terms of their own skills development, board experience. We know that we've had staff governors who have gone on to gain promotions. It's something to talk about in interviews and applications if you're a governor, because so yeah, it benefits, and it benefits the institution as well. You know, kind of upskilling staff through governing does benefit the institution, gives the staff more confidence, for example, and develops new skills. So I think it's just about, you know, everybody understanding why it's a good idea, and not just doing it kind of in a silo within your own department.
Fantastic, thank you.
Let me just add very quickly on that, Emma. I think what we found when we were looking at this is that, you know, even if universities are, you know, a half or a quarter of the scale of the programme as is run at Manchester, the potential impact with, you know, your local schools, you know, is enormous. You know, there's an enormous benefit for them. And, you know, having sat in lots of meetings, thinking of lots of initiatives, you know, from a widening participation point of view about, you know, what work universities can do with schools, you know, this seems to me like a really natural, you know, I don't want to say easy, because obviously Alison works really hard in Manchester, but, you know, if you are already working with school partners, if you're already, you know, looking at attainment programs or running summer schools, you know, if you already have those links in, you know, this seems to me to be a really natural next step for really maximising and kind of accelerating that impact, especially at a time when schools, you know, are going to need all the support they can get. You know, it's a really nice way to kind of strengthen some of those links and relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I cover the Northwest, so I work with Alison closely, but when you see kind of the calibre of volunteers that come through from both staff and alumni, you can immediately see the impact that they're going to have, and you know that you've literally got schools crying out for the skills that these people are able to contribute. So them not being a parent or them not having previously worked in education, that doesn't matter. They'll have a passion for education because they're either working in an institution or they've been through their own education journey. So we see every day the impact that these volunteers are able to have. So that leads me on quite nicely to say a huge thank you to the University of Manchester for all the work that we've done together over the last 10 years and a bit now, I guess. Any other comments from Jess or Alison before we wrap up?
Just read the report, and I really hope you enjoy reading the report. It's not too long, but obviously with Jess's model in there too, it's a chance to be a little bit interactive as well, and look at kind of some potential impact that you yourselves can have. So
yeah, go online. If you're here from a university, go online. You just need a little bit of base, the number of staff in your institution, the number of alumni that you have, and we can help you kind of set some really, we think, achievable targets for what your school's governors program might look like in 10 years time. So yeah, hopefully it'll kickstart some really good conversations.
Yeah, be exciting to see the results. Just on that note, we've got a couple of sessions for universities tomorrow. So in the morning we've got a session about engaging your alumni networks to make sure that we're reaching those effectively, and you'll hear from some speakers at universities that have done that really well. And then in the afternoon we've got a session about making sure you engage your governor network, as well as Alison does at University of Manchester. So again, you'll hear from some speakers from different universities who are already actively engaged in doing that. I do hope everybody's found it useful. There's a few thank yous in the chat to Alison and Jess, so thanks ever so much for that. And yeah, someone else saying looking forward to running sessions in person, which yeah, we all are. That would be really nice. But for now, it's been lovely to be joined by you all. And yeah, thank you ever so much for your time. Thanks again to Alison and Jess, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.